How to cope with widowhood. Lessons from 9 biblical stories of widows. Widowhood is a subject that touches many lives, yet it is often overlooked. Losing a spouse is one of the most painful experiences a person can go through, leaving behind emotional scars, financial struggles, and in many cases, social isolation. In the Bible, we find multiple stories of widows, women who faced challenges that are not so different from what widows face today. Through their lives, we learn lessons about God's care, their perseverance, and people's attitudes toward them, both positive and negative. In this video, we will explore 9 stories of widows from the Bible and what we can learn from them. These stories offer insights into God's heart for widows and give us guidance on how we should treat them. Each story teaches us about faith, resilience, and hope in the face of loss. Let's begin. Story 1. Tamar, the widow without justice. Genesis 38:6-11. Tamar's story is one of deep injustice. She married the firstborn of Judah, but the Bible says that was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and God took his life. Genesis 38:7. This left Tamar a widow. According to the law at the time, Tamar was to marry brother Onan to provide offspring for her late husband. However, Onan also wronged her by refusing to fulfill his duty, and he too died because of his disobedience to God. Genesis 38:10. Fearing for his last son's life, Judah withheld his 3rd son from Tamar, leaving her alone, childless, and abandoned. Tamar took justice into her own hands out of frustration. Feeling wronged and desperate, Tamar disguised herself as a prostitute and waited for Judah on the road to Timnah. Judah did not recognize her, and he slept with her, leaving behind his seal, cord, and staff as a pledge. When it was discovered that Tamar was pregnant, Judah initially called for her to be punished. But when she revealed that Judah was the father by showing his belongings, Judah declared, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." Genesis 38:26. Through this bold act, Tamar secured her place in Judah's lineage, and her sons Perez and Zerah became part of the line that would lead to King David and ultimately to Jesus. Tamar's story is a reminder that neglecting widows or denying them their rights is an injustice in the eyes of God. For widows today, feeling neglected or forgotten can be a deep hurt, but God sees their struggle and will work toward their justice. Tamar's story also teaches us that while we should stand up for our rights, we must do so in a way that is aligned with God's will, avoiding actions that compromise our faith. Story 2. The widow of Zarephath, trusting God in the midst of lack. 1 Kings 17:8-24. The widow of Zarephath lived during a time of severe famine. She had only a handful of flour and a little oil left, preparing to make a final meal for herself and her son before they would starve to death. It was at this moment of desperation that God sent the prophet Elijah to her. Elijah asked her to make him a small cake first, promising that her supply of flour and oil would not run out until the famine ended. The widow trusted Elijah's words, and God miraculously sustained her and her son. Even more remarkable, when her son later became sick and died, Elijah prayed to God, and her son was raised back to life. This widow teaches us the importance of trusting in God's provision, even when we have almost nothing. Many widows today face poverty, and this story reassures them that God is aware of their needs and will provide. It also encourages others to extend generosity and kindness to widows, just as Elijah did. Story 3. Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth, loyalty and a new beginning. Ruth 1:1-5. The story of Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth begins with tragedy. Naomi and her family left Bethlehem to escape a famine and settled in Moab. While there, Naomi's husband died, leaving her with 2 sons. Her sons eventually married Moabite women Ruth and Orpah, but after about 10 years, both of Naomi's sons died as well. Naomi was left with no husband, no sons, and no clear future. Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, urging her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab and remarry. Orpah returned home, but Ruth refused to leave Naomi, famously saying, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Ruth 1:16. Ruth's loyalty was remarkable as she left her homeland to care for Naomi. When they returned to Bethlehem, Ruth worked in the fields to support Naomi, gathering leftover grain. There, she caught the eye of Boaz, a kind and wealthy relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz, moved by Ruth's loyalty and hard work, protected and provided for her. Eventually, Ruth and Boaz married, securing a future not only for Ruth but also for Naomi. Through Ruth and Boaz, the family line of King David, and ultimately Jesus, was established. Ruth's story shows the power of loyalty, faithfulness, and trust in God's plan. For widows today, it is a reminder that loss does not have to be the end of the story. There can be new beginnings, even after great tragedy. The kindness of others, like Boaz's generosity, is also a powerful lesson for how we should support widows. Story 4. Bathsheba, a widow in the midst of tragedy, 2 Samuel 11-12. Bathsheba's story is one of complex circumstances, starting with a tragic sequence of events. She was originally the wife of Uriah, a faithful soldier in King David's army. However, when David saw her from his rooftop, he desired her and summoned her to the palace, where they committed adultery. Bathsheba became pregnant, and in an attempt to cover up the sin, David arranged for Uriah to be placed on the front lines of battle, where he was killed, 2 Samuel 11:14-17. Bathsheba was left a widow under tragic and unjust circumstances. After Uriah's death, Bathsheba became David's wife, but their first child died as a result of God's judgment for David's actions. However, God did not abandon Bathsheba. She later gave birth to Solomon, who would become one of Israel's greatest kings. Despite the tragic beginning, Bathsheba's story ultimately became part of the lineage of Jesus, Matthew 1-6. Bathsheba's story is a complex example of human sin, but also of God's redemptive work. Her widowhood came through betrayal and violence, but God's grace still touched her life. For widows today, this story shows that even in situations where they have been wronged, God can bring healing and restoration. It also reminds us of the importance of repentance and forgiveness, as seen in David's later remorse. Some widows may feel that they have been wronged or caught in tragic situations, much like Bathsheba. Her story encourages us to trust in God's ability to bring restoration and new beginnings, even when the past is filled with pain. It also serves as a warning against the misuse of power and reminds us to seek justice for those who have been wronged. Story 5. The Widow with Two Sons. Finding hope in desperation. Kings 4:1-7. This widow approached the prophet Elisha in a state of desperation. Her husband had died, leaving her with a debt she could not pay, and creditors were threatening to take her 2 sons as slaves. Elisha asked what she had in her house, and she replied that she had only a small jar of oil. Elisha instructed her to borrow as many empty jars as she could and pour oil into them. Miraculously, the oil kept flowing until all the jars were filled, providing enough to sell and pay off her debts. This story teaches that even in our moments of greatest need, God can take what little we have and multiply it. For widows struggling with financial burdens today, this is a powerful reminder that God can provide in unexpected ways. It also calls on society to help widows who are trapped in debt or poverty, recognizing that God values their well-being. Story 6. Anna, a widow devoted to God. Luke 2:36-38. Anna, the prophetess, became a widow after only 7 years of marriage and spent the rest of her life, about 84 years, devoted to worshipping God in the temple. She fasted and prayed constantly, and when she encountered the infant Jesus during his presentation at the temple, she praised God and spoke of Jesus to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. Anna's story is one of devotion and faithfulness. She found purpose in her widowhood by dedicating her life to God. For widows today, Anna's life shows that even in loss, there can be a deeper calling. God values widows and hears their prayers, and their lives can be filled with meaning and impact through faith. Story 7. The Widow of Nain. Jesus' compassion for the grieving. Luke 7:11-16. The widow of Nain was mourning the loss of her only son when Jesus encountered the funeral procession. Moved with compassion, Jesus stopped the procession and touched the bier. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." And the boy was raised from the dead. This story highlights Jesus' deep compassion for the grieving. His actions show that he cares not just about the physical needs of widows, but also about their emotional pain. In today's world, it reminds us to show compassion to those grieving the loss of a loved one and to trust that God is with us in our deepest sorrow. Story 8. The Widow with 2 Mites, Sacrificial Giving, Luke 21:1-4. In this well-known story, Jesus observed a poor widow putting 2 small coins into the temple treasury. Though her offering was small, Jesus said that she had given more than anyone else because she gave all she had to live on. The widow with 2 mites teaches us the value of sacrificial giving. Even though she had little, her heart of generosity was what mattered most to God. For widows today, this story reassures them that their worth is not in their material possessions, but in the sincerity of their faith. It also challenges us to give sacrificially and support those in need. Story 9. Widows mourning Tabitha's death, the power of community, Acts 9:36-37. Tabitha, also known as Dorcas, was a disciple in Joppa who was known for her good works and acts of charity. When she died, the widows in her community mourned her deeply. They showed Peter the clothes she had made for them, and Peter, moved by their grief and their love for Tabitha, prayed and raised her from the dead. The widows in this story show the power of community. They supported and loved Tabitha, and their grief over her death demonstrates the impact of kindness and generosity. For widows today, this story is a reminder of the importance of surrounding oneself with supportive, loving relationships. It also shows the importance of honoring those who care for others in the community. In conclusion, widowhood can come in many forms: through the death of a spouse, leaving behind children, or through long years of solitude like Anna. The widows in the Bible faced diverse challenges: financial hardship, loneliness, grief, and societal neglect, but they also found hope, resilience, and support in God and others. All these women we heard their stories remind us that God sees, hears, and cares deeply for widows. If you're a widow, know that God values your life and your story is important. For those around widows, let us remember to show compassion, generosity, and justice, as God commands us to do. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Let's continue to learn from these powerful stories, applying their lessons to our lives today.